let's get started then. So welcome to the second application formalization workshop. Some of you may have attended the first one, hosted by Todd Olson and Jen Colt. So this one is going to be slightly different in the sense that the previous one was really about looking at it from a functional level and stepping down into the different aspects of how you would want to organize the different modules into functional areas. What we're going to do here is kind of the opposite. We're going to go from the ground up. We're going to go from the bottom, from the existing modules, and look at the intricacies that already exist between them, figure out how to partition those into applications. So I was hoping that Ramon could be here to help us through this. He's unable to come today, but maybe he will be online. If he is, he can join in at any moment to make comments as he wishes. Okay, so let's get started. So this workshop, maybe not quite like the other one as well, in the sense that it's not so much interactive. It's mostly going to be walking you through the process from the ground up. It's the same process that was used to create the spreadsheet that some of you may have seen that I shared 2 years ago now. An initial analysis just to see if it even made sense to do this application refactoring, whether it was a benefit and advantage, which it was. So we'll walk you through sort of what led to the spreadsheet in a way, and then how to work through the analysis that comes out of it. So workshop here is not homework, and I think Jeremy last time coming to was the most difficult session you've been to at WOLFcon. This is more Bob Ross workshop. You just sit back and let Bob do his painting and just hands-on work.
Happy little minds.
So,
All
right, so still streaming in. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background here. So the problem we're trying to solve here is that Folio is a monolith. It is essentially a large bag of modules that get released by the community release. And at present, well, not even present, last May, there were 220 modules that existed. And for reference, that's 30% increase from when I did the analysis 2 years ago, but there was just over 170 of them. So it's a growing problem. We have these modules. And what we want to be doing is to structure these in related applications and create application structures around the modules. So we group them together. And then we can also benefit from this because the dependencies that have to be managed can be managed at a higher level. There'll be fewer of them, fewer permutations on the dependencies. So, and eventually this leads us to a better place in the platform where we can then start thinking not so much about monolithic releases with, everything goes at once. And if you didn't make the boat to the community release, then you're stuck until the next one. This way, if modules can have, their applications, I should say, should have their own life cycles, they can be released on their own cadence independently, and that would be a benefit for everyone. So the challenge that we have to face for this refactoring into applications is that there are 220 modules. There's more, actually, there's been several since then. There are also different kinds of modules. So we've got back-end modules, UI modules for the front end, we've got edge modules, we've got plugins, we've got some libraries, and other things that aren't even really technically modules. So we got to sort that all out. There are also, multiple domains. I think the last presentation referred to them as areas of Folio. There's domains. So there's some relationship, there's circulation, cataloging, etc. Now these modules have tremendous number of dependencies between them. So it's not easy to figure out how to separate them because they all depend on something else, which depends on something else. So you get direct, indirect dependencies. Sometimes you have circular dependencies, which is a problem. And there are also different types of dependencies. They can be, required, or they can be optional, which leads to consequences as well. So we're looking for that Goldilocks solution, the one that says, this is kind of the right balance. We break the modules up into smaller, into bigger applications or not, but just find the right blend and the right size for doing that. Sometimes that means we're going to take some modules and group them together into an application. Other times, such as an inventory, you would think that's an application, but it's not. That needs to be broken up into many smaller applications. So for this workshop, what we're going to do is we're going to again, walk through the process that led to the spreadsheet analysis, and we're not going to analyze the whole thing. We're just going to focus on one particular domain and step through it and figure the process is. So the goal we have, right, this is the definition of an application that we've been floating around, which is it's the minimal but complete set of elements, meaning modules, which together are intended to deliver a specific solution to Folio. And specific solution means something narrow, like orders, for example, would be a solution. So, keyword. All right, so first step that we have to do is we have to choose a domain that we're going to analyze. And this is useful not just for this presentation in the sense that I don't want to walk you through 220 modules, but also because it's part of the process. You know, you don't want to tackle this all at once. You want to focus on a subset, work through those, and work through the other ones in a different phase. All right, so functional analysis it starts with, you know, figuring out what are the domains. So we need to select one. We know sort of offhand there are some intuitive domains that exist. There's a user domain, inventory domain. They each have their advantages. For the purpose of this exercise, I think you know, we got to find the right one. Some of these are too small, some are too large, and so let's figure this out. So 220 modules, different types, and everything else. Many domains. Looking through these, you know, ahead of time, assuming you've done that functional analysis, you know your domains, you're going to pick one in there. We're going to do acquisitions today. Acquisitions is kind of like Goldilocks. It has a number of applications within it. It's not too complicated. It has not too many dependencies. So it's a good one to go with. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So the second step is we need to identify all the modules that are related to this domain. So how do you do that? So first you look for where the modules, the applications and modules are defined. So one obvious place is you look in the JIRA projects that are related to this, and you identify the modules that are there. You also, there's a very convenient page on the Folio wiki, which lists the responsibilities of the different teams and the POs associated with them, and also lists the module responsibilities for the different teams. Fortunately, they're also somewhat organized by domain, so that's very helpful. In fact, I'll say that for the spreadsheet I did 2 years ago, that was my starting point. That's where I started, and then I added things that weren't there from that basis. So the goal is to gather all of the pieces that potentially relate to this domain, which is acquisition. So you can see on the right-hand side, we've gone through this and we've identified maybe 25 modules in the repos that exist and that relate in some sense to the acquisitions domain. And feel free to ask questions at any time if you have any questions. Okay, so now how do we do this? So first thing we do is we start with the backend modules, because you know there are many different types of modules, but the backend modules particularly are where the majority of the dependencies lie. So we need to identify where those are, and you can see that you know there's a convention in Folio, and backend modules tend to start with mod in their name. So we can identify those bolded up here, and you know we can look at this and we can say already, you know, something starts to emerge here. We can recognize there's some potential applications. We can see, you know, we've got some finance, we've got some orders, invoices, maybe organizations, definitely. And there's this Gobi thing and EBSCOnet. That seems like it's specialized. It's probably an application on its own. And so, okay, that's the first starter. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to get into the dependencies. And this is the interesting part. This is where it gets kind of colorful. To look at dependencies, right, you can bring up the module descriptors that are assigned to each of the modules, and you can identify from the module descriptor, there's this on the left, sort of the dependencies that are declared between all of them. You can tab between the module you're looking at and the other modules, and you can tabulate that relationship and sort of identify where, you know, which module depends on which other module. And you can do this manually. It's kind of tedious, but there's lots of tools out there that let you do this kind of dependency management automatically. So if you do, then you end up with something like this. So this is a very interesting kind of analysis, actually. And we've listed all the modules here. So we have all the different types of modules that exist. And it's hard to see, but some of these are kind of shaded a little bit because we're pulling in, we made a dependency manager, we're invoking some modules which we did not identify initially as being part of acquisitions, right? So inventory came in, circulation, tags, users. So those are grayed out a little bit. So they're kind of like external dependencies, external to the domain. So we can see a few things already in here, right? So we can see that, as I said, we have other domains that are getting involved here with different colors. We have a cluster here. Lots of dependencies seem to be focusing on mod invoices. We have another cluster on mod Gobi, cluster on mod Usconet, and you'll notice that it depends on a lot of things, and nothing really depends on it except up here. And then we've got this unholy mess right here we have to deal with. So let's move on. So first thing we can do is we can sort of clean up the diagram a little bit by combining together the back end and the front end module, which belong together. So that removes a lot of the moving parts here. So you can see you've got, back in the, yeah. So yeah, we can combine them, and they're not listed here, but we can sort of remove all that stuff from in here, put the storage modules together, titles wrong, sorry. You can move the storage modules together with the functional modules. So, you know, you've got mod orders here, mod order storage together. It makes the picture a little bit clearer. So you have sort of a sense of what goes where. It clears up the image. And now, if you take away all those external references, you end up with something like this. It's a very simplified diagram now. So we're noticing a couple things here, right, that emerge from this analysis. First thing is, we have this thing at the top here called edge orders. And if you were just looking at it from one name, you think, well, the edge orders goes into the orders app. But as it turns out, it really has nothing to do with it. Edge orders is just sort of a front end for the Gobi and EBSCOnet. So it's really sort of I guess a place to decide how to connect to external vendors for orders. It's really not the order application for itself. So that's one lesson here. And then we can see here that we have this circular dependency going on. So you have orders depends on organizations, and organizations depend on orders. So that's another problem that we have to deal with. And the point here is to do an analysis and understand, you know, how things will fall out when we get to it. So now we do the analysis, right? And as I pointed out, when you have orders, it's actually not part of orders. It's actually going to be something separate. And we can sort of color code and group together the modules that on the last diagram we saw were logically going to be combined into a type of application. Some oddballs show up. We have this here, act models, looks like a module. It showed up in our first extraction and everything, but turns out it's not really a module. It's just a build component. It's used to build the different modules that are related to acquisitions. So we have to exclude some of those, or at least find a place for that to live in the application space. Okay, so now we look at the UI modules. And so we can take the UI modules now, and we can pretty easily assign them into the proper grouping, color coding them together. So we pull in the orders here. We can pull in UIs related to the orders. We have similarly organizations, etc. So we're getting a pretty coherent picture now. And this analysis has led us to conclude that we have basically 8 applications in the acquisition space. And this is then here. We derive the color code summarized in here, including this oddball. And so I think it was pretty successful to get a picture of how to get your applications out of a group of modules. So what are the lessons learned here? So the lessons learned are that, sometimes the module names can be deceiving. Like edge orders is not really an orders application component. There are circular dependencies, right? We have to get a solution around those, and maybe not, but orders and organizations pop out as obviously circular dependencies, which have to be addressed. The UI modules have, pretty close relationship to the backend modules that they have, so we can park those pretty easily alongside their corresponding backend modules. That's the easy part. And the the thing we discover also is that the UI module is not shown here, but they have dependencies that don't necessarily show up in the analysis that we did. And so that means that you may have a UI module that makes a direct call into a backend API that isn't otherwise listed in the dependency management analysis that we did with the backend module dependencies. And then finally, you know, we have a problem with the plugins. So if I go back for a second, we can see that there are at the bottom here a number of plugins which are really intended to be shared between UI modules, between front end pieces. So, and that's why they're plugins. So we'll have to find a solution for this. We don't know the solution, but there are many possible ways to deal with this. And obviously one way to deal with it is, well, you could take all these things as shown here and sort of group them together into a plugin application, if you will, so they can all be delivered at once. Or you could take some of these, like the find fund maybe, and make its home be, like, say, the finance application. And then you would have that dependency if you wanted to do it. So that is a problem. We still need to figure out how we choose to solve it, but plugins are something we're going to have to deal with. Another option is to just not do plugins and simply embed in each of the UIs the appropriate piece. Not my favorite. Okay, I'm going through this rather quickly. I hope there's lots of questions. Otherwise, okay. So how do we get there, right? So we have an idea of how to do some analysis, and now we want to apply this to the project itself at some point down the road, and maybe tackle it to make it happen. So another aspect of this, as I mentioned earlier, is that aside from not having to do it all at once, in the sense that you don't have to tackle 220 plus modules, work on your domain and do one at a time, that's fine. But even so, we don't have to come up with the ultimate solution. So we identified eight applications within the acquisition domain. Doesn't mean that you have to do that off the bat. We could maybe go out the door and say, let's figure out these 3 different applications and group some of those ideal applications together into other ones. And why would we do that? Well, because of all those dependencies, it makes it difficult. So, and there is an inherent expectation here that in order to make this better, we would also find ways to remove those dependencies as we go along. So what we probably want to do is an iterative approach, which says, start with a bunch of these things, and we'll group them into sort of medium-sized applications. They're not the Goldilocks, but we put them together because they need to be there, and they'll work together, minimizing the number of inter-application dependencies that way. And eventually, at a later phase, we can, take one of these guys and break it up into more appropriate sized pieces. So it's an iterative process that needs to be done. And by the way, this is the approach that was taken also with the Eureka platform, right? As I mentioned the other day, there isn't, there's application support now, but there is no attempt to really define what those exact applications are going to be. Instead, there are kind of like this, very large application, lots of modules. We can refactor them later. That's fine. That's the desired approach. And then, the benefit here obviously is that we then can move from a world of dependencies between modules to dependencies between applications. So if we're looking at the module dependencies, well, there's just a lot of arrows here, as you can see. Some over here. We just have one dependency. This application depends on this one, which will help simplify the dependency management, because the fewer errors you have, the better off you are. So, so that's that. Okay, and we're done. So that was a quick one. All right. Any questions or thoughts on that? Jason, I think you're first.
Yeah, well, how do you handle resolving Kafka topic dependencies across domains? Because that's been a huge challenge, figuring out what to deploy at what time, or what to clean up after the fact, what to go look at.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So the Kafka topics are problematic in a number of different ways. including the fact that they're not really versioned or anything right now.
Yeah.
And they're not formalized in any sort of schema of the message. But ultimately, I mean, Kafka topics are mostly the responsibility of one particular application. I would think that there's a publisher of messages. The messages are posted and then consumed by others, generally speaking. I would imagine, but again, I'm just speculating, that you could control that as part of the application definition. You could add the messages that are, to put the versioning and schemas for that.
I'll go quick, but after that, there was something on the chat. Sure.
Oh, okay, there's a chat. Okay.
So I was just going to sort of build on your thoughts there and suggest that perhaps it would be appropriate for some kind of asynchronous messaging definitions to be included in interface descriptions. So when you're defining an interface, you're saying that one of the things that we do is we provide this kind of message, and you might also say we would consume this kind of message within the interface definition to make it a little easier to sort of hook things together on the other end. That's just one.
Right, and since interface definitions are basically a part of the application, right? They come with
Sort of, they're hiding underneath.
So that does sort of lead towards having the messages managed or defined and coordinated through the application scope. Yeah.
So Ingolf raised his hand.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
It just popped up on the screen.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Ingolf?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I like the idea of having a core set of modules and an integration set. I came to the same idea when I was listening to the talk. For example, Edge orders is acquisition, but it's somehow an extension. You don't need to install it. So, and I think maybe there will be not only one integration. Maybe there will be integration A, integration B, which you can alternatively install on top of core. Yeah, it's my statement.
Okay, yes, that makes sense.
Question, who will decide how modules are organized into apps?
Who will decide?
Yeah.
Well, I think that ultimately, as it is now, we have teams that are responsible for modules, principally. And there is sort of if you look at the mapping of the teams to the modules, you'll probably find that modules that belong together in an application will maybe belong to two different teams. But I think, first of all, we need to sort of consolidate that and recognize that a particular team is responsible for an application in the same sense that they're responsible for modules now. Just make sure they have that context. And then it would be the team's responsibility to maintain and define that application going forward.
Okay. Yeah, in a previous workshop on that, it sounded like institutions would be able to mix and match modules to make applications. Was it not modules then? Was it like apps to make super apps? I didn't understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure which talk that was at, but yesterday. Okay. Well, there is kind of a premise here in that modules belong to applications, and the whole point of it is so that we stop thinking of things in terms of modules because there's too many of them, and we start thinking in terms of applications because there are fewer things. So ultimately, though, there is another benefit, which is that we have this growing problem with the releases in Folio. Everything goes into the community release, and I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but whenever someone creates a new module, gets accepted by the project, it gets into the project, the release grows, and it grows, and it grows. So if we have applications that we identify as core applications that are functional, we can limit sort of the flower release to be just the key, LSP applications that everybody's going to need. We have like the Gobi application here, that, look, you don't need that if you don't do business with that particular vendor. If you have other very specific vendor connectors, you don't need those. So you put in a tier above that, which is the application tier. And I would imagine that, get back to your question, that the needs to be using modules in a special way and so forth could be addressed in that extended tier, right? That inside of the Folio core, we really do want to keep the modules in one application. So if you have, mod orders, for example, that's, if you want to consume mod orders, you consume the orders application and you get everything that comes with it. If you want to take the latest version of mod orders, you get the latest version of the orders application, which will bring in the new UI orders, maybe, because there's probably some changes there. So it actually helps you avoid having to have sort of a compatibility problem between the pieces if you're just picking up individual modules. So the application defines a complete set of functionality. So why would someone want to just rearrange that? I'm not clear. So maybe you have a use case for what you're thinking of rearranging applications at the institution level.
Well, maybe always a misunderstanding in the session yesterday.
Oh, okay. Well,
Jen raised
open question. Oh, Jen, you want to say something?
Just, I'm guessing that the question is about the activity that we did in the Tri-Council update and the application interaction groups. I'm guessing because that involved sort of a card sort of applications into what you're calling domains. And I guess I would say a couple things. First, that activity was directed at sort of subject matter experts to get at how they think these things should be organized, and also to get a wide range of subject matter experts, not just American libraries, which might be sort of highly represented in the way this is being thought about right now. And that things that to kind of get, we have sort of a bias to the way things are right now, but we want to have wherever this ends up work for everyone. And so we wanted to get a lot of different perspectives. And that's kind of what that activity was about, to see how a lot of people are thinking about. I purposely did not use words like core in that activity because that just isn't going to mean the same thing to everyone. We wanted to get more at, like, if you had ideal flexibility, what could you build as an end user who really understands library work?
Right. Yeah. Okay. I remember that. I was there as well. So to me, the main takeaway from that first presentation on application refactoring is there was an exercise on the functional side, as you said. And to me, it was to help identify what those different domains might be. So we were creating groups in the columns. And as I pointed out here, that's sort of the premise, that we already kind of know that. And once we know what this acquisition domain is, then we can sort of work deeper and figure out which modules might go into it specifically. So yeah, I agree with that perspective, definitely.
I don't mean this facetiously, but I'm wondering how we collectively agree on what a domain is. Because I'm thinking, so I'm a cataloger.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about inventory, and I'm thinking about all the related MARC tools. And my personal preference would be that MARC be separated from inventory entirely, and yet that might be entirely antithetical to the way others work. And I don't know that, I don't expect you to have an answer to this.
But I kind of do, because the domains and we call them areas of Folio at the time, are not formalized anywhere, right? It's not as though we're saying, let's create a domain descriptor and identify which things go in there. Instead, we'll have platforms for that, for gathering applications. But so it's just there to help thinking and organize things, right? And I completely agree that cataloging is a separate domain from inventory management. And when I made the comment earlier about there are some modules that are, sets of modules, mod inventory being one, that they don't need to have things added to them. They need to be broken up into smaller ones. And I know of at least 3 different modules or applications that'll come out of that, right? Being inventory management, cataloging, and probably authorities, which are also embedded there now. So I do completely agree with that. Yes, there was a question online here too about merging modules to create bigger applications, and will this have impact on system efficiency? Lots of microservice benefits. So, and permissions of yes. So the answer to this question is that I don't think it actually does run opposite to the microservice approach that we have. Instead, as I actually presented last time at WOLFcon, I think that we need to rethink what we call the microservice boundary. And applications should actually have been the microservice boundary in the first place and not modules. So because the rule we followed is that when you have a module, and we call it a microservice right now, it is responsible for its own storage. And there is pretty good about this. We don't allow one module to directly tap into the storage of another module because that breaks the microservice boundary. On the other hand, if we start grouping these very related modules together, they could share storage, because if the application is the microservice, then we're not breaking the rule. We can have different modules pulling from the send data directly in the storage layer. We have to coordinate, obviously, so we don't have collisions if things get written from 2 different modules, but it actually makes it more efficient that way, because we have less traffic, pulling data from one module's microservice and another microservice, and then doing a merge of large data sets to find the intersection. So if we can do a little bit better efficiency that way, that's actually a benefit, I would think. I'm not sure, Todd or Wayne, which one was first, but Wayne? Todd? Okay.
So in principle, do you imagine that applications should be composable at the institutional or hosting level, or do you think that applications should be defined at the project level
I think application should be defined. So this goes back to what I was saying before, that there's a concept that applications will be composed into platforms, which we're not talking about here, but there's an idea that modules compose into applications and applications go into platforms. And platforms are a place to allow you to combine different applications as needed for the particular platform, right? I think there was another talk about this already. You may want to create a Folio LSP is currently our platform, essentially. We have all the core modules for that, which could be packaged into applications, but you could make up a Folio ERM, which includes just the electronic resource management piece. And that would be a different platform that has a subset of modules, maybe a couple other specialized modules that don't go in the core LSP platform. So that's where I think the composition happens, right? And similarly, the platform has an extended tier, so you could put in extensions for different applications there. Do you see a benefit in having someone declare an application that basically says this application is these 3 other applications together, as opposed to just saying I want these 3 applications?
You're asking me?
Yeah. Well, you raised the question.
Yeah, I do see the benefit in that, but I wasn't sure if I was sort of philosophically opposed to the vision that you have.
Right.
And the benefit I see is higher granularity of modular. Right. So for example, if I want to re-implement the user's interface backed by LDAP storage. The interface is the same, responds to all the same API calls. Someone reads the code and figures out all the Kafka shit, and but the backing storage is not Folio,
right,
or not Postgres
sure.
database. how would I compose that into a platform if applications aren't composable?
Right. Because, well. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So that's an interesting example because that was sort of the perspective we took at the beginning of the project, as you remember, which is entirely why we have mod inventory versus mod inventory storage, right? The idea was that, and in fact, we did this in the beginning. There was the idea that we would have a MongoDB maybe version and a Postgres version of, for storage modules. So you could swap out the module you wanted. In the end, though, it turns out that, we never had the resources to branch out into different storages. We consolidated, we said, well, for Folio, we're going to stick with Postgres because that'll make it better, easier for everybody, not just for development, but also for operational maintenance. If there were multiple storages. So I think that, you would have to create a new application in this.
Right, but not if applications aren't composable.
Right, not the proposal, but that implies though that the storage is a separate application from the functional piece, right?
In terms of,
Like, how would you compose a solution that you described with inventory, with MongoDB, with composable applications?
So if you, going back to perhaps the example I've thought about one more. So going back to the user, for example, let's say we had an application that was UI users and mod users in the current sort of thing.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to plug in my mod users instead. I would want to be able to compose an application, and I would admit that I would say it's a different application from the user's application that has been defined by the project.
Mhm.
I would want to be able to compose an application that contained my implementation of the user's interface.
Yeah,
I can answer here. So, yeah, it's a pretty common question. And if you have still the same interface, and for example, you have an application window that contains two modules, so UI users and mod users. And for example, for instance, you have your own implementation of modules. You can create another version of the same application that contains still contains UI and mod users, your custom mod users. Yeah.
So, but that goes against one fifth sort of thing, that applications should not be composable on that level by institution. That's all. I agree that that's the technical solution that is most obvious, but
right.
so it's a philosophical question, and the question is, do we let the technology, like which philosophy is more important as a project to us, the philosophy of the modularity and the pluggability, or the philosophy of, well, it works better if everything's in the same state.
Right.
And I think both have weight. I'm not saying that one is stupid, or the other, but you know what I'm saying. Right?
So, yeah, and I agree. It is philosophy. And so my perspective is that we've taken a pretty granular approach to doing things in Folio right now. And we've got kind of a mess, right? So this is an attempt to bring some order and organization to that mess. And yes, there's going to be some obvious loss of flexibility when you have things that are less granular. Great. Let's get some other questions. Yeah. Ian, you want to say something?
So I was having thoughts about applications that are inherently incompatible with each other. So let's say you had the user's application, and then we have Wayne's super cool LDAP user application. Two applications that exist. They're not the same thing.
Mhm.
They implement the same, one would do the job, or the other would do the job, but you're not going to put both in place.
Mhm.
And they're not the same thing, so you don't necessarily want them tracked in the same. They're not. One's not a version of the other. They're completely independent things that do the same.
They're
job.
alternatives.
Or, for example, what I was thinking at first is the edge orders. Like, okay, yes, you have edge orders, and it's like a super integration app that integrates with all the things that we thought to integrate with. Or someone could just lop off like, no, it's just GoWeave. We're just doing this is the GoWeave
Right.
interacting. And you would not install both of those at the same time because they parallel each other. I don't have any clearer thought than that, so I'm gonna stop.
So I think the way I would think of it is that you can compose platforms. And this is certainly an area that you know, hosting organizations and vendors, institutions can work on their own and compose their own platform if they wish. And if you want to make a platform with, call it Wayne's super cool platform with Wayne's super cool user application, that would be the way to go, because then you wouldn't bother with the other user application because you don't need it. You've got a replacement. That's one way to deal with it.
I get maybe I'm jumping in and thinking about this hypothetical, like the App Store future.
Yeah.
Where like you got like all these wonderful choices to
Correct.
pick from and to compose that platform.
Yeah.
And I guess that's happening more at a more technical level that doesn't have to. People will just take care of it, not making it collide or not.
Well, remember, we still need to have dependency management at the application level. And you can specify in the App Store which requirements you have for your app. Like this app needs to have a super cool user application as a dependency because it offers something that I need, right? So that's certainly part of the rules there. You had a hand up here.
Yes, regarding, letting institutions choose how modules are turning into apps. The problem with that is that would prevent optimizations and upload. Like you said that modules could do cross module database queries, for instance, within an app. That's something that I find very interesting. I mean, I'm a founder developer, so I'm dreaming of doing joint queries between finance and orders and invoices, because that would improve performance significantly and also simplify our code. But if the institution can just separate them, then it's not going to work.
My only comment is that, to my knowledge, application formalization as a process within the project has stopped at them. Has not decided specifically not to consider domains in that, right? That was deemed to be like, that may be something to talk about later. We haven't talked about that yet in the triangles. I mean, we talked about not talking about it. Right? I mean, Greg, is my memory right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, another thing that we talked about with the Tri-Council group is that there's sort of two angles you could approach this problem from. And this workshop, this session is more about sort of the dependency angle. So looking at the dependencies and grouping things logically from that perspective. The other approach is sort of what the other session was about earlier this week, where you're basically looking at the functionality and what is the granularity you want and so forth. And I think you can do both in parallel and then identify the gaps between them. And what you're going to find is that there are going to be code changes required to close those gaps, right? Including even just within this, you saw those circular dependencies between these organizations and orders or something like that. So some things can be grouped today and remain composable in that sense, with few sort of inter-app dependencies, but other things will require code changes. And I think the first step is identifying what those problems are, and then defining the work and prioritizing.
Zach, you had your hand up.
Right now, we have mod users and mod users LDAP. You can tell that they're swappable because they both implement users interface version of 2.0. How can we tell if application users and the application users LDAP are compatible?
They don't have to be. It's because they would be complete applications that have to think. Because the other aspect of that is if your two UIs on users consume the same mod users interfaces, but then
Mod users isn't an interface. Mod users is an implementation. Users is an interface. So my UI doesn't care. My UI doesn't even know that I have all that behind the scenes because the only thing my UI consumes is users.
but your UI is consuming APIs in mod users, right?
Yeah,
Well, it happens to at the moment.
And what's that?
I said it happens to.
Yeah,
It's consuming APIs that are defined as interfaces.
as
Right.
interfaces, sure. But the point I'm getting to is that now you've got a backward compatibility problem, because if mod users is tightly coupled with UI users, they can work in conjunction with each other. And if there's changes to mod users, they will need to, if it's a breaking change in an interface, then you can account for that. But now if you've got a refactoring of that into a recomposition into another application that uses the exact same mod users, you have a breaking change that is difficult to manage, right?
Interfaces are version, but I mean, that's.
yeah,
Their version, but yeah, but this is part of the problem we have.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem, so I'm just not.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm not just throwing sand. I understand.
That's fine. Okay. We've got some time here. We've got a couple minutes left. Alexi?
Yeah, it's maybe not a question, but a couple notes from my side. During the split up, the list of modules, the applications, at least I tried to do it, but I found a problem that's mostly related to UI, from my perspective. And let me describe that. For example, as an example, we have a UI application that consumes a backend element, but for 99% of these cases, we are specifying backend interfaces as required, but actually they are not required. And I know that we have an if permission switch on UI. Okay, user have this permission and we can show them buttons. But why we can't add something similar for interfaces?
We have that AI does it.
If we have, it's perfect, but
we do.
it's so rarely used. And it's maybe we should somehow highlight it and try to change the mindset of developers to think about not only, okay, I need to consume this API, let's put it to required and that's it. I don't want to do some this additional work here while I think about it. But
Okay.
the most part of the dependencies between things are concentrated on UI. Because one UI can one UI application can consume different interfaces from even different, let's say, application or domains. And it becomes a big chunk of things that concentrated around one UI. And another one example from backend side, everyone knows that we have a multi-mentoring amazing model that worked and worked well, but we added source records, and before we added this smart source records, multi-mentoring worked without having the smart source record. But right now, we can't install, for example, modern inventory without adding this source record stuff. And it tried to install other data import and all this other stuff. But why? We should do this tight relation. I think if we are going to split up it very well and organize these applications, we start thinking about some maybe changes, not like architectural, but just wrapping up already existing things and split up them. Okay, this model provides us functionality, but on demand. Yeah. Okay, we can do it, but it's not required. Yeah. And another thing that is maybe a question to you, Vince. What do you think? Should we somehow specify or formalize what is the minimum requirement? Required list of models for things to say that, okay, it is an application. Because I tried to split up it and I find myself with a couple of apps that name like, okay, inventory core, acquisition core, but after installing this application entirely, don't even to not reach any new functionality, just a couple RAT APIs and things that can work independently, just something very abstract, not functional.
Right, so I'll just answer that, then we can wrap up because we're at time. In the previous presentation, maybe last year or the year before, posited that there is no minimum number of modules in an application. In fact, I could even imagine, you have an application that consists of a single module. You have applications that have no UI modules, or just a bunch of backend modules. Or you could even have an application that has no modules, whose purpose is to just deliver some fixed configuration, for example. So I wouldn't think there is necessarily a minimum for application. Mark, you've had your hand up, but
yeah,
go ahead.
Would it be just trying to be practical, in terms of the next steps, next steps, would it be fair to say that, as you suggested, we start small, right? And they would pick the domain. And I'm wondering how to get it done. Should that be included on the product roadmap and aligned with the flower release? Let's say by the sunflower release, we all agree as a community that we need to focus on creating applications for one domain, or just a single application. And then would it also be fair to say that Eureka is an enabler for this? And so, once Eureka is more widely available, this is when we can start experimenting with rolling out different applications. Because we're probably not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay, right?
That's right.
But the sooner we start with this, the better, because we'll be able to.
Yep, I mean, that's a multi-rhetorical questions, but I'm not going to answer them. But yeah, I agree completely. And Eureka is an enabler for sure. We have the structures to support the application when they come. Absolutely. All right, so let's wrap it up. Thanks everybody online and for attending today.
Just one more thing to address some of the concerns that Alexi was raising. I think as a whole, Folio needs to be more accurate with declaring dependencies. We found that there are missing dependencies that aren't declared at all. We found that some dependencies are listed as required and they should be optional, and so forth. And so that may not be a huge problem on the Application platform, but it's a problem for Eureka, especially when you start doing these exercises, trying to group things into applications.
Okay.